All we've got to do now is to start pumping.
What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to the Fully Inflated Football Podcast. I am your host, Marcus Whitman. So as many of you are aware, the podcast over the summer definitely dials down a little bit as the deep dive series that I'm sure most of you are following, it really takes up most of my time throughout the summer. So I'm not able to do the weekly content, though I do upload the audio versions of the deep dives on the audio podcast. So the deep dives kind of become the podcast in some ways. But anyway, the regular weekly podcast will resume once the season arrives. But that said, I do want to stay on top of the mailbag. As always, this show is brought to you by my Patreon. It's patreon.com/ThatFranchiseGuy. And I got to thank my patrons, man, not just for the support. It literally helps pay my rent, put food in my belly, and allows me to do what I do here on this channel for a living. So thank you so much for that. But beyond that, thank you for these amazing Patreon mailbag questions. We've got like 29 questions for this show, and it's going to make up a really exciting podcast. I think you guys really brought the heat with some really awesome questions, and I'm excited to dive into this thing. So if you want to be a part of that, head over to patreon.com/ThatFranchiseGuy. You can support the channel. You can submit questions to the show. All I ask is that you do it through the DMs there on Patreon, not the content like creator page or whatever it's called. It's hard for me to track that. And also, guys, you will get exclusive content as well. I just posted a Josh Allen film breakdown of his game against the Colts. Awesome game by him. Was super impressed. Not just the out-of-pocket play extension, big plays, but the more fine details were really showing up for Josh Allen. So about a 40-minute film breakdown on Josh Allen there up on Patreon right now. If you want to be a part of all that, it is patreon.com/ThatFranchiseGuy, and I appreciate you in advance for your support. And thank you again to everyone that has sustained support following the draft, because I know that the exclusive content hasn't been popping out like it was before the draft, but hoping to get an uptick in that now as we approach midsummer. So let's go ahead and hop into the mailbag. Like I said, we got like 30 questions here, and actually a couple really good ones that showed up on Twitter. And I think at least one of these guys is a patron. But anyway, this one was from Leo Robertson on Twitter. Broncos or Chargers for the better roster? Probably Broncos, but as a Chargers fan, I gotta ask. So this one's really hard because, and I clarified with him, this is non-quarterback, because obviously you're taking the Chargers if you get Herbert out of it, but non-quarterback. This is really hard because I think the Broncos have a more promising roster for the future, just as far as youth, but also like more depth. Whereas the Chargers have like elite, high-end, top talent. You get Bosa, who you'd rather have than Von Miller. You get Derwin James in the secondary. You got Keenan Allen, who's a little bit older, but is, to me, a top, let's just say 8 receiver to be safe. And then the offensive line looks really promising as well. Whereas the Broncos, it's like position group by position group. You're just loaded with youth and talent and depth. And I said Broncos, but I don't feel good about it. And it's really hard to pass up that offensive line and Derwin James and Bosa. But I think the Broncos have enough star talent paired with the depth that I would lean Broncos ever so slightly. But it's all hypothetical anyway. You put Herbert versus Drew Lock into the equation, and it becomes quite obvious who you're taking. But yeah. Next up, I actually didn't screenshot the name for this one, so I apologize, whoever sent this question in from Twitter. But I was just wondering who your favorite player at every position in the league is, because I was thinking about taking your roster in Madden and using your all favorite guys team, which would be sweet. That'd be fun to do like a stream of in some way. But let's just go through it. Quarterback, it's got to be my dude, Aaron Rodgers. He's my favorite athlete. He's a big reason I got into football as much as I did in the early 2010s or whatever you want to call it. Running back, I think For some reason, I'm a big Joe Mixon guy. I know that's controversial because of his history, but I think he's really evolved as a human, and people speak highly of what he does in the Cincinnati area. So I do respect that whole, learning from your mistakes at an early age and bouncing back in a big way. And he's just, I think, underrated, and people don't realize how good he is because of how bad the Bengals O-line is. So that did come to my mind, but I think my final answer here is going to be Saquon Barkley, kind of similar to Joe Mixon, where he hasn't had the best situation. He's had some injuries, but I do think Saquon Barkley is the best prospect I've ever evaluated, period, and is obviously not suffering production-wise for the Giants, but if you put him on the Niners or, I don't know, the Patriots or some team that really knows how to get the running game going, yeah, I think Saquon Barkley would be the best running back in the NFL, and I don't think it would really be much of a debate. But unfortunately, the Giants just haven't unlocked that. So I think Saquon would be my running back. Receiver, Julio Jones. I've always been a big Julio Jones fan, and that one's pretty straightforward. I mean, the dude's a freak. He's a great leader. He's an all pro on the field and off the field. So I think Julio's my favorite receiver. Although A.J. Brown's getting up there, very similar, and I didn't even think about the fact that they're both on the Titans right now when I answered that question, so that's pretty sweet. Tight end, Kittle. Fun on and off the field. Gotta love a guy that's so good in the receiving game, but also blocks the way he does. He is the best blocking tight end in the NFL, and that's independent of the fact that he runs a 4.5 and is a great receiver. Offensive line, let's just lump that all together. Quentin Nelson, gotta be Big Q. Is probably the people's favorite offensive lineman as well. Although Trent Williams, got to throw Trent Williams in the mix there. Dude is just a steamroller. Edge would be probably Khalil Mack for me. I was a big J.J. Watt fan, but I think Khalil Mack is my favorite edge rusher right now. Or my dude Rashawn Gary, who I'm hoping is going to light the world on fire and make people look like idiots because he was hated coming out, and he was one of my dudes. Those would probably be the first two guys that come to my mind there. Interior defensive line, I mean, Aaron Donald's the cop-out, but it is Aaron Donald. I know these are all just big-name superstars. I'm trying to dig a little deeper than the top five at each position, but other than Aaron Donald, who else do I like? I do like Quinnen Williams, Ed Oliver. I like both those guys coming out. How about Jeff? He's not my favorite, but a shout out to Jeffrey Simmons. He's a guy I'm excited to watch. A lot of Titans love here. And then linebacker, Roquan Smith was the first name that just came to my mind, but I think Eric Kendricks will be my final answer. I think he's a little underrated. Love the way he plays the position. I wish more young linebackers watched Eric Kendricks' tape and played like him, because he plays the position like a safety. He is the ideal modern linebacker in my opinion, and he's developed in run defense as well. Cornerback, Jalen Ramsey. I'm a huge fan of the trash talking corner, and he backs it up on the field. So Jalen Ramsey's got to be my favorite corner, and then safety is Derwin James. The guy's got to stay healthy, man. But I got the jersey right there. I know you can't see it in the video podcast, but I really hope Derwin can stay healthy. That dude's so awesome, and I just want him to remind people how good he is, because I think when healthy, he's the best safety in the NFL. Okay, over to the Patreon mailbag now. So again, guys, it's patreon.com/ThatFranchiseGuy, where you can submit questions to the show. Going to be doing these mailbag episodes every 2-3 weeks as soon as 20-plus questions start to pile up. I'm going to try to hop on and do a podcast like this. But from Nick Christensen, love your work, Marcus. Keep it up. Thank you, Nick. I've heard draft pundits criticized a draft pick because it didn't fill a team need, for example, Pitts for the Falcons over a defensive player, but it seems to me that the best drafting teams draft for the next 4 or 5 years. The question goes on, but you're basically saying people overrate drafting for need, and completely agree on this. And now the draft, strategy questions, it's always a matter of balance and situation. In general, My theory would be probably about 60 to 65% draft best player available. And then I do think you need to consider needs, especially when you are a team like a piece or two away from a Super Bowl. So if you're, say, Tampa Bay in the draft last year, they went all need, and it also happened to be best player available, but they went need. They drafted a right tackle and they drafted a free safety. Those were the two positions they needed, and they happen to get great players there. They go and win a Super Bowl. I've been critical of, say, the Green Bay Packers for not drafting for need as much. There's situations where I do think you fill needs, but it's not always that simple. The Bills are probably a couple pieces away from being a Super Bowl, but they totally drafted for the future this year. They took 2 edge guys, 2 tackles, all kind of project players in a certain way. So it's always a balance, but yeah, PFF does a really good job of breaking this down in the NFL PFF podcast, and it's you never know when a need. It was actually the PFF forecast. I want to credit this correctly, but you never know when a need is going to pop up. You never know when your top corner is going to go down. You never know when a tackle is going to go down, a receiver. Use the draft for the most part to get as many good players as you can at important positions as well. Receiver, corner, edge, all that stuff, offensive line. And eventually you're going to be happy at some point that you have that depth of talent, especially at those critical positions. So there's a balance of it. But yes, as a mock drafter on YouTube, couldn't agree more that draft pundits or whatever, people way overreact to teams. You might not draft for a need in the first or second round. You might draft best player available, and I think that is a good strategy for the most part. You can pick and choose spots where it's worse than other times, but totally agree with you on that. From Carter Allen, what do I think of the Pat McAfee show? I know some people think he's annoying, but I love his show. So I lumped the Pat McAfee show in with Good Morning Football. I've got my places where I go for deep, hardcore NFL breakdowns and analysis. And then I've got, sometimes I'm not always in that mindset where I really need to, I want to get the deep dive into the NFL. But, sometimes it's nice to just have a lighthearted, fun outlook. I take those shows for what they are, and they are more entertainment based as opposed to analytics, informative based. And I think Pat McAfee and Good Morning Football are great sources for that. So that's the way I look at it. I think Pat McAfee is super entertaining, and it's not like he doesn't know what he's talking about. He wouldn't be my first choice if I wanted to ask him who I think wins the Super Bowl this year. But I think he at least has an understanding of the game that he can mix in the entertainment stuff, and he's wildly entertaining. So I'm a fan of the show. I do tune in and out. For Matt Sierra, with the increasing value of athletes in the NFL over anything else, do you think we'll start to see more skilled players being passed on for someone who is just an athlete? I actually would go the other way on that. I think that the athleticism, it hasn't changed too much, and I don't think it will. Teams will and always place a premium on the best athletes. But that said, corners are faster than ever, receivers are faster than ever, linebackers, edge, everyone is faster than ever. And speed's always going to matter, like I said, but I almost feel like teams can place a little bit less of a premium on speed because you can get speed in the 3rd, 4th round, or you can find speed for cheap in free agency, whereas in 2005, finding a receiver that can run even a 4.3 was much harder. So I actually would go the other way and say that teams are going to place more of a premium on line play, both offensive, defensive. So the bigger, stronger athletes that are also really athletic, quarterbacks obviously, and maybe waiting a little bit more the smarter linebackers, the smarter safeties, because most of these guys are great athletes. So I would actually go the other way. The game is getting better at utilizing athleticism, but I think that's also because there's better athleticism everywhere. So as far as positional value and team philosophy, I don't think it's changing much, but I would actually say it's a slight shift away from placing that high premium on speed. But, Henry Ruggs was the first receiver drafted last year. Jerry Jeudy picked ahead of Devontae Smith this year. There's obviously exceptions where teams are still going for that high-end speed. But those are elite echelon athletes as well. From Nicholas Craig, I've watched a lot of my videos. Amazing, by the way. Thank you, Nicholas Craig. I've yet to get a grab on what my thoughts are on Baker Mayfield and what I think his best QB comp is. So I love Baker Mayfield now. He was one of my original bad draft takes. I didn't see the arm talent. I didn't see it at Oklahoma. I'm not going to apologize about it. I'm honest about it. I missed on Baker Mayfield, but from the second he took his first snap for the Browns, I was like, he's got it. He's got the arm talent, which completely wiped away my college eval on him. I can't remember a player where that's happened, where I was like, he had one defining trait that I thought was bad, and then after one game, I'm like, holy crap, I was wrong. That was the case with Baker Mayfield. But I think now much higher, like not just higher, much higher. I think Baker is already on the fringe of being a top 10 quarterback. We saw it his rookie year. He played like a top 10 or so quarterback. Couple rough years for the Browns, but now, or really just, this is his fourth year, right? So really just one down year with Freddie Kitchens. And then he gets Kevin Stefanski, a weird first season where it's a new system. He loses Odell. He played in a bunch of bad weather games. But once he got used to the system and was getting better weather, he played like a top 10 quarterback again for the second half of last season. I thought his game against Baltimore, where they actually ended up losing, but this is a process over results thing, they were down, I believe, 2 scores in the second half, and he made some third down plays that were just special stuff. Like he could have taken a check down or forced a one-on-one on the outside, but used that pocket presence and the play extension to open up the game and led a comeback that did fall just short against I don't even know if I'd say a better Ravens team, but just, Lamar was special in that game too. So I'm really impressed by Baker Mayfield. I think he's a sleeper MVP candidate this year. I think he's going to get that, as much money as he wants after the season. He's in a great system. He gets Odell back this year. I always thought it was silly that people thought the Browns would trade him. Like, what do they have to gain from getting a second-round pick for Odell? Their roster's good enough. Getting Odell Beckham back healthy with this version of this offense and Baker Mayfield is what's really going to unlock this thing. He was also doing it without any good receivers last year. So I'm really impressed by Baker. I think he has, top 6. Like, I think he can be an elite quarterback. I really do. There's no traits he doesn't have. He's a great worker off the field. He's accurate. He's got a strong arm. I would put him in there's like a cluster of guys in like the 8 to 13 range right now, and maybe it's time I do another quarterback tiers video, but I think he's in that cluster of really outstanding quarterbacks that have the upside of an elite guy. So that's my stance on Baker. From Shane Conrad, I've been trying to justify Pittsburgh not going for a QB, whether through the draft or undrafted free agency. I can't wrap my head around it. We know what Rudolph is. Do you think Colbert sees a possible future with Dwayne Haskins? I would have loved Jamie Newman in the 7th or undrafted free agent for reference. More Jamie Newman love. I hate to say I told you so, guys, but Jamie Newman, not a good quarterback, currently a street free agent. You could go get him if you want, Pittsburgh. Dwayne Haskins, I've talked about this. Like he's in a great situation that's like conducive for him to get all the off the field stuff correct. My big thing with Dwayne Haskins is like, even if, and this is a massive if based on what he's shown in the NFL as far as like his commitment to the game, even if he develops like a baseline of NFL work ethic, which he has not shown to this point quite clearly, even if you can get him to, pour his heart into the game like you need to do to just be a starting caliber NFL quarterback, like you have to know so much as an NFL quarterback. Even if he does that, his like traits aren't that special. Like he's got a good arm, but he doesn't have like a rocket arm, and he's not a good athlete. So I just don't. I'm just kind of done on Dwayne Haskins. I said it when like a week before Washington cut him, or maybe it was the week Washington cut him. But I don't think there's anything there. Even if Mike Tomlin can get the most out of him, what is the most out of him? The 25th best quarterback in the NFL? Like, I don't know. I agree. I think, Pittsburgh is doing one more year with Big Ben. That seems pretty clear. But you would like to see some sort of plan after that. Like, you don't want to just go from Big Ben to Mason Rudolph. I agree. I think they could have done more. But who would that have been in this draft? The top 5 guys were gone. Is there a huge difference between Dwayne Haskins and Kyle Trask and Kellen Mond? Not really. So at the same time, it's like, what else would they have done? So I understand, like, as a Steelers fan, you feel kind of hopeless for life after this season or even this year, depending on how big Ben can be. But also, like, what else would they have done? So sometimes it's better to just hit rock bottom for a year, and I don't know if the Steelers would do that, but they are in a weird, tough spot, that's for sure. From Ethan, I'm from Houston and wanted to see what the opinion of others were on the Texans prior to the Cal McNair-Watson situation. They were a respected team. I mean, they were in the playoffs more often than not, especially with Watson. They were even, winning games before Deshaun Watson. They were a respected organization. I don't think anyone perceived them as like an elite culture or elite deal there, but they were a middling, well-respected team with a good fan base. Just a respected organization, which they obviously aren't now. I don't think they were thought of like terribly highly, but yeah. From Jose, do I think that Kyler Murray has the upside to be a top 5 quarterback this season? Love the content, best football knowledge, without a doubt. And Twitter making me laugh at people that give me hate. I do like to blast people on Twitter that are unnecessarily hateful. Yes, I think Kyler Murray. This season. Yeah, I think he has the potential. I've always thought Kyler Murray has elite level upside. So at any point, he could be ready to reach that. To me, it's just like, it's almost like, in my mind, Cliff Kingsbury is the guy holding him back. It's not just Cliff. Like, Kyler is far from perfect. The big thing with Kyler is how much is his inability to throw over the middle of the field going to hold him back? Quarterbacks can craft their game in a way that avoids their weaknesses. Tom Brady, not a mobile dude. I would say Russell Wilson has crafted his game around the vertical passing game, and similar to Kyler Murray, not attacking the middle of the field as much. Aaron Rodgers wasn't always the guy that wanted to get rid of the ball so quickly, but he made up for that with all the amazing plays he made. So, and taking care of the football extremely well. So, like, everyone, you can kind of find weaknesses. I think Kyler Murray is a pretty clear weakness right now, and that is he is one of the worst quarterbacks in the NFL at both reading the middle of the field and accurately throwing the football over the middle of the field, which you can probably attribute to his height, being like 5'9" on a good day. So I've talked about this as well. The problem is the Cliff Kingsbury air raid offense, the core heart of that passing game, you go to Oklahoma, Texas Tech, is a mesh concept where you have double crossers and then about a 10-yard in route over the top of that, designed to attack any sort of zone coverage. And if that's the heart of the offense, everyone was talking about, Cliff's going to take his guy and Kyler Murray. I believed it as well, but we've kind of seen it play out where it's actually not an ideal scheme fit as far as the concepts that they like in Arizona. It's kind of ironic, actually. So for me, it's like, Cliff, can we get a little more play-action boot game? Can we get a little more deep crossing stuff, attack the sidelines a little bit better, get a little more creative with DeAndre Hopkins maybe? The offense, like, they're creative with their running game, but the passing game is not very creative. So that's my big holdup with Kyler Murray is that a coaching staff that's going to correctly craft the right offense around Kyler Murray? Because that's all, like, what I think Kyler Murray is good at is getting on the move, throwing vertical outside the numbers, and that's really not the air raid offense at all. So that's my holdup with the Cards. I am curious to see what they do with him this year, though. From WG, which Dynasty fantasy football platforms do I think are the best? The one with the most features and depth is my fantasy league. I'm in a couple leagues on there, and the interface has improved over the years, but it's still rather complicated in my opinion. But if you want a lot of features, if you want to be able to trade picks and have like a taxi squad and all the different cool stuff that fantasy does, that's where I would recommend. There's the Sleeper app. I have a league on there. I'm just not a huge fan of the app. Like, all the features and stuff are great, but the layout's really confusing to me on there. I'm just not a huge fan of that app at this point in time. I've seen a lot of bugs on there as well. If they could make the app a little better, I think that would probably be my answer, is Sleeper. But and then ESPN, it's like, if you don't have a lot of rules, like, I like the ESPN Fantasy app just for its convenience. I think it's very user-friendly, but they haven't updated that thing for like 3 or 4 years. It's really frustrating. I've thought about getting my Dynasty leagues off of ESPN because I want to add some features there. So if you think your league can handle a little bit more of a complicated interface, I would say my fantasy league. And if you want to be a little more of a simpleton, I would say ESPN. From Robert Sterling, after the Raiders draft, how do I think we are playoff bound? I'm not a biased fan, but I feel like we had an A-plus draft. The Leatherwood pick was getting a lot of heat. I feel like it's going to pan out, but I'd like to hear my thoughts. Keep kicking ass with the great content. I appreciate it. I respect you for liking my content despite being a Raiders fan, because I'm not very nice to the Raiders, but I have my Raiders deep dive, and I'm not optimistic for the Raiders season. I think they're let's just say wild roster building, I think, finally catches up with them, and the talent gap is just going to be too much for them. Because I really do firmly believe that they have a bottom 3 roster in the NFL, and Gruden's coaching elevates that. But I'm not optimistic. I'm glad you are as a fan. I hope I'm wrong. I don't mind the Raiders. I don't know. I had the deep dive if you really want a deeper look into that, but I have a really hard time picturing the Raiders making the playoffs this year. I really do. I don't think they have the talent. I like Carr, but he's not the type of quarterback that can elevate a roster like that. So, yeah. Let's move on. From AJ Reed. Firstly, I want to say I love the content, even if haven't always agreed as a Bears fan. Now, as a Bears fan, I disagree with the notion that the Bears are one of the worst situations for Fields. There are good weapons. He lists them, along with good running backs. The defense is still in the top half of the league. Top half is an understatement. That defense is still legit. Fields, even if he isn't ready week 1, also has Dalton and Foles to mentor him. The only real concern is the O-line, who wasn't healthy last year, but did improve, plus the addition of Jenkins and Borum. I'd argue the situation comes second to San Fran. I'm assuming you mean compared to the other rookie quarterbacks. I do prefer his situation to Trevor Lawrence in Jacksonville. I will say that. I think Mac Jones is going to the Patriots with the offensive line in front of him, with Belichick, that defense. I still would say he's in a better situation to develop and be the other thing about surrounding core. It's not just the personnel; it's also the coaching and the system. And Matt Nagy, like he I don't think he's a bottom 5 coordinator in the NFL, but I don't think he's a top 16. Whereas in New England, like, he's got Josh McDaniels, who worked with Tom Brady. Like, that scheme fit is just ideal. The coaching, it's going to be just the creme de la creme for Mac Jones. And I think if you put Fields, although they're also working with Cam Newton, so it'd also be pretty good for New England. But I think the situation for Mac Jones, specifically given his skill set in New England, is better. But for a typical quarterback, maybe not as much, because the receivers aren't up to snuff. The Jets would be the one with Zach Wilson that I would actually, I think the Jets situation is incredibly underrated. I just did their deep dive, but the O-line, underrated in my opinion. The receivers, I love the diversity of skill sets that they have at receiver. They got athleticism. They've got guys that can produce with Crowder, and that have produced, I should say, with Crowder and Corey Davis. And the scheme, man, I love the scheme fit. He's getting the same scheme he ran at BYU, that Shanahan offense. So I actually would say Wilson is in a better situation. I think Mac Jones is in a better situation. But I think you could make a case the Bears have it better than Jacksonville because he's going to get help from his defense, and he's got playmakers, and it's not like Nagy's a bad coordinator, and I do agree that he's in a good situation where he doesn't have to start right away. And then who are we forgetting? Oh, yeah, I mean, Trey Lance, that's obvious. Trey Lance is in. He's got Kyle Shanahan and all those weapons and the offensive line. Like, that's obvious Trey Lance is in a dream scenario for a quarterback to get drafted there. But I would say, yeah, I still think he's third or fourth amidst the rookie quarterbacks. I don't know if that was me that said that he's in the worst situation or not. I guess it probably was, but maybe that has changed over time. But yeah, I think he has a chance, absolutely, to develop in that situation. It's far from the worst situation any of the rookie quarterbacks have landed in. And in fact, I think I also said, even if I said Fields was the worst, I think I did say that I love that all five of these quarterbacks actually, went to legitimately good spots for them. I know Jags fans are probably mad at me saying they're last, but it's not like it's a bad situation relative to like Sam Darnold going to the Jets or some of these other spots we've seen. So I think all five quarterbacks went to, relative to the past, to history, they went to good spots where they can develop and reach their potential. From Josh, do I think as a defensive head coach, but also a culture establisher, Robert Sala, I've learned, I have been saying that incorrectly, so I apologize, Jets fans. Do I think Robert Sala could have a similar coaching career to Ron Rivera? Yeah, absolutely. They're like very similar as far as the rah-rah guy, defensive-minded head coach. I mean, pretty much every defensive head coach in my mind outside of Bill Belichick, who's just next-level genius, I think has a certain floor about them, which is like, you can be one of the 10 to 12 best coaches in the league, but you got to kind of have it all line up where you have the talent on the offensive side of the ball and you have an offensive coordinator that hasn't gotten plucked yet. Because it's not like you can't, in a given year, have a good offensive coordinator if you have a defensive head coach, right? Robert Sala hires Mike LaFleur. I think that's going to work. But how long, when does Mike LaFleur get plucked to be a head coach somewhere else? Who's stepping up? Is it going to be a good or a bad coordinator? And if it's a good one, does it align with your roster being in the right state? Because to play good defense, you do need a really good roster on that side of the ball. So it just, I think, means more things need to go right as a defensive coach, but it doesn't mean you can't win a Super Bowl or anything like that. I think it does make it a little bit more difficult as like a 10-year projection. But yes, I love that comparison. Robert Sala to Ron Rivera, 100%. And, Ron Rivera ended up kind of aging out in Carolina because he did kind of peak out. From Jacob Buzard, who has the better surrounding talent right now, Lawrence on the Jags or Wilson with the Jets? We actually just answered that. I would lean Wilson on the Jets, but it's not like Lawrence is in some terrible situation. I do have some questions about it's. For me, it's really, I feel better about the Jets' offensive line than the Jags now that they're bringing in Morgan Moses, but also the play calling. I'm not convinced yet with the Jags. Now, I could be very wrong. They could have this outstanding scheme and a great offensive setup. I'm just not sold that Darrell Bevell and Urban Meyer are going to craft this fluid, well-run scheme on offense. I'm just not convinced. I'm not as high on Urban Meyer. I have a lot of questions for the Browns this season, but I feel like one of their biggest question marks is the wide receiver room. Do I feel like Higgins or Peoples-Jones are poised for a breakout season, or will it be a point of weakness if OBJ still isn't back to form? I don't think the receiver room will be a true weakness. It's just not like it's not like some elite room. I do think OBJ will be back. I am optimistic about OBJ this year. Rashard Higgins, I feel like he is what he is. I don't see him having a breakout season because he's a guy with 4.6 speed. He's a smart receiver. He can sit down in zones. He's a good contested catch guy, but I don't see him having a breakout just because I feel like he's kind of maxed out. But Donovan Peoples-Jones could. His skill set's really good for that system where, straight line speed, contested catchability, and run after catchability. That's kind of Donovan Peoples-Jones' strength. That's, the Shanahan, a lot of crossing routes, scheming guys open like that. Doesn't always necessarily lean on route running ability, and you have your route runner in Odell. You got your slot guy in almost said Jerry Jeudy, Jarvis Landry. So I think Peoples-Jones has potential. They also brought in Anthony Schwartz, who could be a kind of a take the top off the defense type of threat. So it's far from a bad receiving group. You got OBJ, you got Jarvis, you got Donovan Peoples-Jones and Higgins, who are decent, 3-4 option, and then Schwartz, and a deep tight end group with Njoku and those guys. I think they are more than fine at wide receiver. So I definitely don't think it's a point of weakness. I think it will help them do what they want to do. It's just not like an elite group or anything. From Justin Daniel, dude, who the hell at PFF left DJ Moore outside of the top 32 wide receivers going into 2021? That had to be an oversight. That had to be just like a simple human mistake because there's no way you can justify that. He is at worst top 32. That's absolutely at worst. He's, to me, in the probably 15 to 20 range. From Jake Daughtery, it's hard to ignore the news stories on Urban Meyer. He's been stirring up this offseason between staff hires and talent acquisition. Although it's a tad early to tell, do I perceive Urban Meyer as a bottom 5 NFL head coach? Only on the fact that we haven't seen him yet. I am lower on him, but it's hard. When you haven't seen a coach or a GM, it's hard to say they're bad because we haven't seen them in the NFL yet. But I've talked about it. I'm not saying he can't do it. I'm skeptical about the Urban Meyer hire, and I agree. Some of the stuff that's come out about the hiring and the whole I don't agree with the draft pick of Travis Etienne, but the overreaction to him taking reps at slot receiver, that was stupid. I mean, what does Travis Etienne need to learn at running back other than pass protection? And if they're going to use him out wide on third down anyway, he doesn't need to pass protect. So, yeah, get him as many reps as a receiver to learn routes and learn how to shake slot corners. Great. That's probably something that he can develop and needs to develop to become Alvin Kamara at the next level. So, I don't mind that. But, yeah, I think there's just reason for hesitation with Urban Meyer. We'll see what he can do. From Jack Brown, am I more outspoken about my bias against speed rusher? You are more outspoken about your bias against speed rushers, which I totally understand. I think bias isn't the word I would use there. I prefer power rushers to speed rushers. I don't know if it's a bias or not. I would say it's a preference. But anyway, I'm going to go on a short tangent. I think the word bias is the most overused word in all of the sports world. Bias implies that you have a reason to be a emotional reason to be against something. I have a preference against speed rushers. I prefer power rushers because I think there's data and a reason to believe that power is the way you win in the modern game because quarterbacks get rid of the ball so quickly, tackles are more athletic than ever, all these different reasons that I've broken down. So that's a tangent. I think we should stop using the word bias as much, but I still love you, Jack. It's not just you, don't worry. But I also seem to be higher on finesse tackles like Parrott, Driscoll, Christensen, fair. Do I have a reason for this, and do I think foot speed at tackle is more important than ability to anchor? Great question. I'm a huge fan of this question, Jack. So I'm trying to organize my thoughts here. I think that it's not exactly a eye for an eye type of deal there because, if you don't have speed as a pass rusher, you can still win, right? Brandon Graham, Zadarius Smith, the Bosa brothers. Like, if you are a powerful rusher, you can still dominate. And that's kind of true about power rushers, but power pass protectors. But if you have slow feet, you can't survive. Guys are just going to fly around the edge and obliterate you. So that it's a little different, right? Like, if you don't have speed as a rusher, you can play in a way that you don't notice it. It doesn't matter. If you don't have quick feet and athleticism as a tackle, a good defense, a good speed rusher is going to annihilate that. Like, you can actually just use even a Vic Beasley and just say, okay, run and bend around this guy. So that's, to me, the biggest difference. But also, I just saw a tweet a couple days ago that was perfect for this from Mitchell Schwartz, or Jeff Schwartz, who's Mitchell Schwartz's brother. And the question was, like, what's more important, strength or footwork? And he laughed it off. He's like, obviously footwork. And that's because being a pass protector, especially on the edge, like I would say on the interior, you could make a case that an anchor is more important. But at tackle, it is so much more about footwork and staying in front of the guy and playing with leverage and being composed and with timing and everything. I just think it's much more critical for tackle play because it makes you more matchup proof, in my opinion. But you do still have to have an anchor. It's not like it's not important. I'm worried about Brady Christensen getting just run over by the Rashawn Gary and Brandon Graham and Khalil Max of the world. But great question, and I hope I answered it well. From Gus, what is the best counter for the Shanahan play-action offense that I've seen defenses use? Really difficult question. I am far from a high-end defensive mind. Even the best defensive coordinators in the NFL are struggling at this. So pardon if my answer isn't up to snuff, because this is the number one question that defensive coordinators around the NFL are asking right now. And those are guys that have 30 years of developing as defensive minds. I do not have that. But what I've seen teams use a lot of times is like buzz safeties. So whether it's man coverage where you're bringing a safety down, kind of running that hook zone type of deal, or a cover 3 where you're bringing the safety down into a hook zone, kind of waiting for that crossing route from the opposite side, because most of these corners can't keep up. Even if you run man coverage, they can't keep up with a Brandon Ayuk or a Julio Jones or an A.J. Brown. Maybe Brown's not the perfect example, but kind of yes. So you have the corner on the opposite side play maybe with some outside leverage to protect from any counters and corner routes. And, when you run these play action crossing routes so often, a great way to keep defensive teams honest is to fake the crossing route and break to the corner. And once you start mixing those in appropriately, which like Shanahan and LaFleur do so well, you're just uncoverable. Corey Davis was really good at that for the Titans. So you almost want that corner that's trying to follow the crossing route to play with outside leverage to protect against that corner route, and then you have a safety on the other side of the field ready to help and pick up and cut off that crossing route. The only problem with that is it's difficult to play great run defense when you're so focused on the play action. So that's kind of the heart of it all, and why it all works is the confusion and kind of making it all look the same, and then making you choose whether you want to stop the run or stop the play action crossers. But that's the number one strategy I've seen, is kind of having that safety on the opposite side, which is actually brings me back to like competitive Madden, where that is like a strategy people use to stop crossing routes, is just man up a guy from the other side. It's kind of similar. Anyway, it's something that NFL teams are asking themselves, and I don't have a great answer for it. Teams are trying different things, trying to figure this thing out, but there's no signs of it getting stopped anytime soon. From Brandon Cosby, what's more likely this year in my opinion? Watson playing for Houston or Rodgers playing for Green Bay? I'm going to go with, Rodgers playing for Green Bay. Did I say Watson? I don't know. I'm going to go with Rodgers playing for Green Bay. I think both situations are more likely than people make it out to be. I think Rodgers playing in Green Bay. I think he's playing hardball right now, trying to kind of use his leverage to expose a lot of the issues going on in Green Bay. So I think when push comes to shove, I bet he plays. But I don't think it's a guarantee. I think that's in the 65% range. And then for Watson, I'm a little bit closer to like 50-50. The question with Watson is like, is there going to be a suspension there? Is it a full year suspension? I'll be somewhat surprised if Watson's playing for a team other than Houston next year. So I think that's a little bit closer to like 45% that he plays for Houston. So I would say Rodgers playing for Green Bay is more likely. So yeah. From Joe Woods, thoughts about Marshawn Lattimore. His rookie season was wonderful. He has been inconsistent. Is it scheme? Maybe just not giving it his all every week? That's a great question. I'm not going to act like I'm a Marshawn Lattimore expert. I do know that he just really struggles with consistency. I'm just trying to think. Saints run a lot of quarters coverage, a lot of match stuff. So, maybe it is scheme. Maybe he's playing a little bit slow. Second guessing himself. He has been in a really tough division. He's got to guard Mike Evans and Julio Jones, so that doesn't help. They've had great quarterbacks in that division as well. So, I think it's mostly just the nature of the position is just expect ups and downs, and maybe he's not an elite corner, he's not a top 5 guy. Maybe he doesn't have the mental side of it to be one of those dudes, but I still think he's excellent. I'd pay him a ton of money. I think he is in the top 10 conversation. He's a great athlete. So I don't have any issues with Marshawn Lattimore. It's just kind of it's a combination of maybe his own consistency and just the nature of the position with Lattimore. From Edward Green, between Herbert, Burrow, and Tua and Hurts, rank which QB will have the most improvement this year and why? I would say Tua probably has the most improvement because he was so bad as a rookie. I would say it's almost impossible for him to not regress back to the mean a little bit and be better. Now, he wasn't even a starting caliber player last year. He couldn't beat out Ryan Fitzpatrick. So if he improves from the 35th best quarterback in the NFL to the 25th, you're still not happy about that, but I think Tua probably has the most improvement. Burrow, the thing with Burrow, he looked great to me. I don't know if he's going to improve that much statistically in wins. I think he does. But actual on-film breakdown, I had no problem with Burrow's play. Now, the deep ball accuracy, I think, will almost inevitably improve, which would definitely be a boost for him, quote-unquote, improving from last year. And I think getting Jamar Chase and that chemistry will definitely help with that. So I think I would go Tua most improvement, Burrow next, and then Herbert, it's hard because he's already way up here, right? He played like a top 10 guy last year. And I do expect a regression in the amount of deep balls that they connect on because they were just at a historic clip. It's almost inevitably going to happen. They're just not going to get those same looks. Not that he's going to be a bad deep ball passer or anything, the opposite, but I think that balances out with just the expected growth of better coaching, better offensive line play in year 2 now. I think there's a balance. So I think Herbert will get better. I don't know if it's going to be as much of a jump as Tua and Burrow had. And then Hurts, he has the most room to get better. Maybe Tua has more room, but do I trust that it will? I don't know. His game to me has so many flaws that I don't know if I would predict him to have the most improvement. I don't have very lofty expectations for Hurts. Good question, though. How do I think Matt Ryan will do in the Shanahan offense without Julio Jones? So this, I think, came before my Falcons deep dive. I still want to answer the question, but I'm going to shorten it up because I did break that down. I still think he's a top 10 quarterback. I think he's going to get back to having really good numbers. They're going to have to lean on him a lot because that defense is stinky. I think he's even underrated at this point in time. I think he has a great season. Would have been even better with Julio Jones, but he's got weapons. He's got plenty of weapons. I'm pretty optimistic for that offense. It's just that defense is rough. From Lunar, why didn't I continue playing football? You're incredibly passionate about it. Curious if it was injury. I was the opposite of someone who peaked in high school, I would say. I was really out of shape. I was a total gamer. I was a B student. I just kind of coasted through high school, and it applied to my football career as well. I don't think I was bad necessarily. I also played for a really good program, one of the best in Minnesota. So at the highest division or whatever. So there was really big competition. So I had a hard time getting on the field. So I just, I wasn't I'm not a great athlete, period. I also didn't really enjoy playing offensive line. I think if I was in shape and was able to play a position, maybe like linebacker or even quarterback, I think the only great athletic trait I did have as a kid was a good arm. I wish I was more committed to football when I was a lot younger, so I could have played quarterback. I think things would have changed. The game would have opened up to me in a different way. But as an offensive lineman, I don't know. I had a hard time putting it in the weight room, which is super important to play offensive line. So, maybe I just wasn't playing my best position, and just the cards weren't aligned for me in high school to be a good football player. I really started to appreciate football more after I stopped playing it. So it's a good question. Always fun to look back. Matthew Jackson, where would I put Joe Burrow coming out compared to Trevor Lawrence and Zach Wilson? They're all super tight. Wilson's pretty clearly, to me, behind. They're close. The evaluation's close, but he's not really in consideration to be better than those two. And then the Burrow T-Law questions seem to fly in a lot. It just comes down to preference, honestly. Burrow is maybe the highest floor quarterback I've ever seen coming out of college. To me, it was just he's at least going to be a top 15 quarterback. He was the smartest quarterback I've ever watched in college. He played like Tom Brady at LSU, didn't make any mistakes, was sharp, going through progressions, but then you throw on the mobility aspect. It was just crazy. Burrow, to me, is the best all-around college quarterback I've ever watched. Not the most productive, not the most explosive, but most pro-ready, ready-to-go college quarterback I've ever seen. But he doesn't have a great arm. So, do you value Trevor Lawrence's arm talent and physical upside more? It's not like Trevor Lawrence is a dummy. So, I think, to me, Burrow gets a slightly higher grade, but I would have really struggled between him or Trevor Lawrence if I was picking number one. Luckily, no one had to make that choice. But all three are outstanding prospects and worthy of a number one pick, in my opinion. From Lions, why do so many people believe you have to have blind faith in your team to be a fan? I've been called a fake Lions fan for not having blind faith in the new regime. I don't get it. So I looked up the definition of fanatic for this one. The definition of fanatic, which obviously stems some point into fan. A person filled with excessive and single-minded zeal, especially for an extreme religious or political cause. So I think there's a difference between being a fan and a fanatic, maybe. And maybe about half of NFL fans are fanatics, where they're just going to believe no matter what. Packers fans are dealing with this right now. There's no good reason to believe in the Packers front office, but half the Packers fans are still doing it. So that's the way I look at it, is you've got fans and you've got fanatics. I think the fans can take a realistic outlook and be critical of their team. It doesn't mean you hate the team or you don't want to see them succeed, but I think you're allowed to question things. All right, next up from Vic. What to me is the line between analytics and film? While understanding what you're watching is important, I believe using efficiency metric is also important to predict the future as well, and is a better way of analyzing what happened in the past than tape. Would love your thoughts on this. Yeah, it's always a balance, and everyone's got a different balance between what they think is important. Both are really important. I think you got to use both. Whether it's 60-40 or 50-50 or 70-30, I think that's just something we're trying to figure out. What's the best split there? The big difference to me is analytics are, yes, they're numbers, but they're all based on the film, right? They don't just pull these analytics from the box score. These are companies that put hours into collecting data, and then they use different formulas and stuff to give you your different metrics and your analytics, whether it's EPA or yards per route run or all these different metrics we see out there. Now, if you want to talk about like EPA or say a PFF quarterback grade or all these different things, the biggest difference there is those numbers are generated by a strict set of rules and a system that is designed to have consistency across the board, which sounds great, right? But there are flaws to that. It's not a perfect system because as you're coming up with a grade for a quarterback or trying to do something, you're going to have plays that don't perfectly make sense as you're watching on film. Football is a super complicated game. It's not A plus B equals C. It's a lot more complicated than that. So, like, for example, you end up with Ryan Tannehill as the number one quarterback in 2019, right? Because by rule, for a PFF grade, by rule, it is Ryan Tannehill, if he completes a 25-yard out route from a clean pocket on his first read, he gets a +2, right? Well, you know what else is a +2 is this crazy play where a guy eluded pressure and found his third read. Whereas I can look at that on film and say, okay, what quarterback B did, eluding pressure and making a play that never could have happened, I can look at film and say that is a much more difficult play for that player to make than the throw that Ryan Tannehill faked a handoff, the entire defense bought in, he rolled out to his, took a couple steps to the right, had a wide open pocket, and used his strong arm to hit the throw. That's, to me, where the film comes in, because the rules of the system say that those two are equal, right? Just for whatever reason, the formula plugs out that. But that's where the film comes in for me, is the subjective aspect of it that I still think is incredibly important. And there's also just random little stuff that happens that you can look at in depth and be like, you can excuse certain things or you can explain certain things in different ways. So that's why there's a balance. I think you need to watch all the games and look at the analytics to have a full view on the NFL. I don't think you can just do one or the other. But there's also like a convenience aspect to the analytics that people like as well, because most people don't have time to watch all the games. So that's kind of my short outlook on it. From Loomer, how do the 5 most productive QBs in last draft compare to the top 5 QBs in the first round this year? So it was a deeper class this year, but if you just go, pound for pound, first quarterback, Joe Burrow to Trevor Lawrence. We kind of did that one already, so let's skip over that. Then you go Tua to Zach Wilson. That is absolutely night and day. I actually thought Tua was much closer to Mac Jones this year as just kind of a high floor, low ceiling type of quarterback, whereas Zach Wilson to me, just check out my Jets deep dive that I posted a couple days ago. I'm super high on Zach Wilson. I think he's got all the traits. He's got the it factor, you name it. So that is completely night and day. Herbert versus Trey Lance technically, but I think Herbert compares to Justin Fields in a lot of ways, whereas like coming out of college, you have legitimate questions about Fields. And everyone was like, well, look at what Herbert did last year. That's why we can excuse Fields staring down his first read, which was Herbert's criticism. Well, there's also examples of guys that don't develop that, like Mitch Trubisky at the next level. So, I think Fields compares very well to Herbert last year. And Trey Lance, a little bit different, I would say. I think Trey Lance compared to Jordan Love, there's some parallels, though not really. I would say Trey Lance has a higher physical ceiling based on arm talent and athleticism. I would say he makes less mistakes, but also played for a team that allowed him to basically focus on his first read, whereas Jordan Love created a lot more and I think had more impressive plays on his tape than Trey Lance did. Whereas Jordan Love also made a lot more mistakes because he had to push more because his team wasn't very good, at least in his final year. So not a whole lot of parallels, honestly, between Trey Lance and Jordan Love. Very different prospects. But as far as the total grade, sort of close. And then Mac Jones to... Was there a fifth quarterback last year? I guess Hurts. I mean, they're completely different. That's pretty self-explanatory. You got the structure non-athlete versus the athlete no structure. But Mac Jones is just a much better quarterback prospect than Hurts was. From Vedant, what do I think about the Bucs' future outlook post Tom Brady? I actually don't think it's that great. You're in good hands with Jason Light, so it could be a fast turnaround. But I actually think Bruce Arians is going to call it quits when Tom Brady calls it quits. And you lose your quarterback and your coach, and that thing could hit rock bottom. Maybe not rock bottom. Like, there's still going to be a good culture and a good roster, but I don't think they're Super Bowl contenders when Brady hangs it up, because I do think Arians probably retires after Tom Brady. I think they probably bottom out, and then you're hoping Jason Light can continue his success. So maybe they dip off, and you hope Jason Light can find a new quarterback and build it back up. From Schuyler, loads of buzz around Elijah Moore. Do I think he will take Crowder's place in the Jets' office and be an upgrade? And how much do I think Crowder could be worth in terms of a trade? Well, this, I think, was sent in before the restructure, so there's not going to be a trade there for Crowder. But I do think he's worth, a late third, early fourth round pick as an expensive slot guy, if they were to hypothetically trade him. And then, I think Elijah Moore and Crowder will have a healthy split depending on what kinds of route concepts they're asking of them. More traditional dropbacks, I imagine Crowder's going to be who they want on the field because he's got that great feel as that slot guy to kind of find the first down marker. Whereas Elijah Moore, a young player, maybe not quite as crafty or as refined in his routes, although he's a good route runner, but more explosive with the ball in his hands. So maybe Elijah Moore a little earlier downs, Crowder a little later downs would be my prediction there. But I think it's going to be pretty close to a 50-50 split. And I'm sure both of them will take some time away from Denzel Mims as well. From Austin, I know you're a big fan of the Shanahan offense, but why does it seem like that offense doesn't win Super Bowls? Tampa Bay, Kansas City, New England, Philadelphia, all recent Super Bowl winners, to my knowledge, none ran that offense. That to me is a results over process pointed question. I mean, I look at the fact that half the teams in the league now run it. Most of the best offenses in the league run it. And if they don't, they're implementing concepts from it. A lot of the teams that run that offense haven't had the best quarterbacks. Jared Goff, Jimmy Garoppolo, Ryan Tannehill. The Packers run it, and they fell short, but their roster also isn't as good as teams like Kansas City and and Tampa Bay. It's just an outstanding scheme. We talked about it earlier. It's only a matter of time. But it's not like those teams aren't getting to the Super Bowl, right? I look at it almost the other way, where it's like that's the offense that got Jimmy Garoppolo to get to a Super Bowl. It got Jared Goff to a Super Bowl. That gets Ryan Tannehill to winning a playoff game and going from bust to, star quarterback. Kirk Cousins has been outstanding in that system. It's the ability to elevate and scheme guys open that's so special. And that's it. That is our Mailbag podcast. Thank you so much for watching. We are going to have a new deep dive tomorrow, breaking down our 24th team in the power rankings. Again, guys, check out my Patreon. It's patreon.com/ThatFranchiseGuy, where you can support the channel, submit mailbag questions, check out the new Josh Allen film room. And that's going to do it. Appreciate you guys for listening, for watching, and we'll see you later. Peace.